All right, Dave. We're continuing the streak of these special episodes we have with guests. We're a guest-driven show now, it seems, and definitely excited for our guest tonight. Are you excited, my friend?
I am thrilled to talk to the Viceroy of Verisimilitude, Mr. Robert Meyer Burnett. Robert, thank you so much for coming on.
Well, gentlemen, when the call came in and you told me what you're all about, what you wanted to talk about, and what you offered me some choices, and when I saw one of the choices that you offered me, I'm like, oh, count me in.
Now,
I'm very excited.
what if this movie Contact wasn't on that list? Would you have said, "Yeah, I'm kind of busy that week"? Or,
No, there were other movies, but there's movies there. I think every film fan has movies that they particularly love that maybe not the movies don't get enough love in our space. And one of those movies is the movie that we're going to talk about tonight. And I'm like, oh, because I don't talk about it enough. It's not a movie that people bring up a lot.
yeah, great.
Right.
I'm so glad you picked this one. This one, I think, this might have been Ben's idea on the list. We kind of have a list and we throw them at a guest and they let them choose. And yeah, I was actually pleasantly surprised that you picked this movie because I hadn't seen it since I was pretty young. It's been a long time. I'd say a good 10, 15 years since I've seen this one. So it was great to revisit it. Before we get into this, Rob, I do have to say that I am a fan of yours. I've been watching you on the Robservation's YouTube channel for, I don't know, maybe the last 6-7 months. Not every day. I'm trying, Rob, but I get you
No, it's okay.
a couple of times a week. But I think you'll appreciate this. There are two things you've said, 2 points you've said over. Oh, sorry, I was getting some feedback. Oh, never mind. Sorry, I'll start again. There's two things you said, Rob, that really caught me that I felt like, wow, I kind of identify with this guy. And I think you'll really appreciate it. One is Grace Kelly from Rear Window is like the greatest woman ever. Right?
I should say that it's her character.
Right, well, of course.
You know, look, Grace Kelly is an amazing woman. But when I meant that, like, there are women in movies, they're characters
Yes,
that I would love to, and her character in Rear Window, the way she is, I mean, she's intelligent and spunky and beautiful, and she loves Jimmy Stewart, and the way she can pack a small overnight bag. I mean, she's just the kind of woman that you dream of. And of course, she's fictional, but if you could meet a woman,
if you could bring one to life,
it makes me happy that you caught on that. I love, because not many people say that often, but I appreciate you noticing.
It's right funny. There. We did an episode on this with our buddy actor Dan Franco. We get, we promote tweets of old episodes every now and then. We keep promoting them, and whenever we promote the Rear Window episode from, I don't know, it's almost been 2 years now, probably, Dave, right? Yeah. There's this one Twitter user. I should have his handle right now. Maybe I'll edit it in. But he always mentions, because we'll ask, like, what did you think of Rear Window? And he always says 2 words: Grace Kelly. Grace Kelly, and always has a gif of Grace Kelly. So
that's 3 of us at least. But she's gorgeous. She waits on Jimmy Stewart hand and foot. It's totally. And then she's a woman of status. And of course, she can pack the bag. I mean, she is perfect. And you're like, what the hell are you looking out the window for? Which, of course, is the point of the movie. But
and she's also willing to potentially go seek out and smoke out a murderer
I know.
to risk of her own life and limb. I mean, she's an amazing woman character. It's my favorite Hitchcock film. Yeah. Oh, love it.
I'll go over there. No big deal. What's happening?
I love you that much. And then the second one, this one is more humorous, but still true. You were talking one day about, and actually I played this for my wife. I go, who does this sound like? Which is, you were saying how you love Progresso soup, and you heat it up on the stove, and then you eat it out of the pot. That describes my life. This is who I am. And my wife goes, that's you. So.
It drives my girlfriend crazy. She's like, why don't you put it in a bowl? I'm like, because then I have to clean 2
Yeah, two
pots.
things. Yeah.
Like, I mean, you take it off the pot. It's better. It's more fun to eat from. And then at the end, it's kind of a game I play where you've eaten all the noodles and you've eaten the chicken and all that, and there's liquid left, and you have to drink it out of the bigger and not spill it down your cheeks.
It's a hell of a game because it's like a wide mouth pot.
Yeah, there's a game element to it.
I have to say, I think after Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, I think Brad Pitt has actually made it cool to eat out of a pot when he makes the mac and cheese and everything.
Oh yeah,
in that scene. So I mean, that's Brad Pitt status right there. So
oh yeah,
he's validating us. But I wanted to bring that up because that's it's so funny. That one time my wife didn't know who you were. I just played the video and she goes, "Okay, so you're a weirdo like that guy. I get it now."
Well, it's to me like when I was married once, and then when I got divorced, you have to suddenly you're cooking for yourself all the time, and one of the things you don't want is an accumulation of dirty dishes.
Yeah.
How can you eat effectively? And I'm like, why would you want to pour? I'm pouring liquid. I've already made my soup, and usually when I made Progresso soup, I'd make 2 or 3 cans of it at once. Why would a bowl couldn't fit all of it in it anyway, and I would usually finish the whole thing. So
yeah,
it's just and to me it's like, why wouldn't you do that? That's just practical.
With 100%.
Like, put it in a smaller bowl and you'll enjoy it more. I'm like, no, because then I have to keep going back to the bowl and put it. This I can sit down in one place and eat it and enjoy it, and I'm done.
They just don't get it.
No.
Not so much. Now obviously Dave, you failed to mention he's a director.
He's Progresso soup out of the pot.
Okay, yeah, that's well that first, but I in addition to being a progressive soup eater out of the pan or out of the out of the pot, he's a director, he's a producer and an editor. You've worked on a lot of stuff, Rob. I mean, I've noticed on your IMDb you do a lot of editing on documentaries. How did you fall into that?
Well, it's funny. I worked for Full Moon Entertainment in the 90s, and Full Moon made movies like the Puppet Master movies and the Subspecies movies, and we were doing a lot of direct-to-video genre stuff, and we were basically making a movie a month. And on each one of the movies, because they were short, they would have what's called the Video Zone magazine after the movie, and this was on VHS tapes and on Laserdiscs. And so you'd have a movie that was between 80 and 90 minutes, and then this Video Zone magazine, which would have behind the scenes footage on how was this movie made. Mm-hmm. And so I started working at Full Moon, and one of my jobs was editing those behind the scenes segments. And then I sort of left that. And in 2000, a friend of mine who had a company that was doing special features for Laserdiscs in general, mostly Disney stuff, called me up one day and said, "Hey, we're going to do, DVDs are starting to become big. And we're getting a lot of money, and there's a lot of work in making these documentaries. Would you come work on and do a documentary for me? I'm doing Fantasia." And we're doing the box set of Fantasia and Fantasia 2000. And I'm like, oh my God, I love Fantasia. And I'm like, yes.
Yeah.
So I started doing special features for that company. It was a company called Curdy Pellerin, Jeff Curdy and Michael Pellerin. And I did this one thing, and I came back. And then I worked on Snow White. I did a feature-length documentary on Tron. I worked on The Emperor's New Groove. And then Michael goes, guess what? We were just awarded Lord of the Rings.
Oh, man.
And we're going to work on Lord of the Rings. And suddenly I found myself going to New Zealand for the first time.
Oh, wow.
I was in New Zealand for months at a time, recording audio commentaries and shooting behind the scenes footage and doing interviews. And then it was great. Like one day someone says, we've set up an interview with Christopher Lee in London. Does anyone want to do it? And everyone's like scared.
Yes.
And they all turn and they're looking at me. They're like, Rob? And I'm like, I'll go do it, And so then I started working on those. I mean, it was incredible. And back then in the early 2000s, there was a lot of money being thrown at special features. It was a very lucrative business. Mm-hmm. And then I went to film school with Bryan Singer, and kind of I'd known him for years. And I get a phone call from MGM once. and this woman from MGM had a friend of a friend that knew that I knew Bryan Singer, and they're like, we want to do a special edition of Usual Suspects, and we can't really get Bryan. We can't seem to get him to call us back. Would you like to produce it? And I'm like, well, I'll call him and ask him. And I called him up, and he goes, well, Rob, if you're producing the Usual Suspects special features, I'll do it.
Right.
And I'm like,
Wow.
well, okay. And then I went to my boss, Michael Pellerin, working on Lord of the Rings, and I said, hey, man, I've got this disc that I'm going to do Usual Suspects. How about I bring it in here and we can produce it through your company? And he said, we're too busy, man. Why don't you do it on your own time? And I'm like, okay. He goes, yeah, start your own company. And I'm like, okay. So I started back in 2002. I started Ludovico Technique, which is a Clockwork Orange reference.
Yes.
One of my favorite movies. And
Yes.
my day job was working on DVD special features. I mean, I'm going to London. I'm going to New Zealand. But then I also started my own company, and suddenly I did Usual Suspects, and then we finished that and turned it in. Then I get a call from 20th Century Fox. And they're like, so apparently you have been hired to do X-Men and X-Men 2. And I'm like, I have? Yes, Bryan Singer wants you to do those. And I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
So it sort of went from there. And I first started with Bryan, and then MGM, after Usual Suspects, they said to me, they're like, well, would you like to do any other titles that we have coming out? And I said, well, there are two I'd really like to do. I'd love to do To Live and Die in LA, and I would love to do Valley Girl, the Nicolas Cage, the original Valley Girl.
Right.
And they're like, okay. So Dave Parker, my good buddy who I work with at Full Moon, he was my editor and we worked together. He came on board. He did Usual Suspects. He was my co-producer, and then we worked with Greg Carson from MGM, and we did the 20th anniversary of Valley Girl, which came out in 83. So this came out in 2003. And then I just kept getting jobs. And after I finished Two Towers, I get a call from Disney, and they're like, we really like what you did this feature-length Tron documentary. They wanted me to do 15 or 20 minutes, and I gave them an 88-minute feature-length documentary on the making of Tron for that 20th anniversary. And they're like, we want you to do Chronicles of Narnia because you've been to New Zealand. And I'm like, okay. So suddenly I had to tell, Michael, I'm like, my team and I went to New Zealand for 14 months.
Oh, wow.
And we were in country for 14 months covering the entire production of Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe.
Man.
And then after that, I got another call from Warner Brothers. They're like, so Bryan Singer says you're going to do Superman Returns, and he wants you to go to Australia for the entire time they shoot the movie. And I'm like, okay. And so then we went from New Zealand to Australia. So I was in New Zealand for 14 months and then Australia for 10 months.
Wow.
And it was amazing because I directed the movie Free Enterprise, the one movie I've directed in 99, came out in 99. And I got so caught up in the DVD world. It was very lucrative. I was traveling all over the world, and I felt that I was learning so much about movie making because I was on set with a camera.
Yeah.
And usually with one of my very good friends was the director. So if the director gave me his approval, everybody would talk to me. Right. So it was an amazing experience, and I felt it was like going to grad school and watching, I get to watch a $200 million movie getting made, and I get to talk to everybody who's making it.
That's great.
And it was the greatest film education ever. And then during that time, I also bought the script for Agent Cody Banks and developed it and sold it to MGM. There's a lot of producers on that movie because it was my first studio film, and I'm like, oh, well, okay. Although if you look at the main titles of the movie, which happened at the end, I'm the only producer with a single card credit, which means my name I don't share the credit with anybody. I'm the co-producer, but it's just my name. Every other credit.
Nice.
I mean, Madonna was a producer and she had to share her credit, but I didn't. and then after
Madonna.
And then after we finished, Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe and things like that, we did. We went and produced. Dave Parker directed, and then I produced The Hills Run Red, which came out on Blu-ray this week.
Oh,
and it's been crazy. And then it's just been a very interesting life. Now, would I like to go back to writing and directing movies? Yes, but it's so insane. It's so hard to do that. I've worked on so many projects that have come close to getting made, and then they don't. It's really hard. But nowadays, I've got a project I've been working on literally for 30 years that I think the world is finally caught up to this project that I want to make.
Oh wow.
So I hope that's my next directorial effort. But
Is
we'll
it
see.
an original script or?
No, it's based on a novel. It's
Okay.
based on a novel, and I befriended the author when I first moved to California, and I actually paid him when I was making good money on Chronicles of Narnia. I took some of that money and paid him, and he wrote a script.
Okay.
Interesting.
And
Now,
so, yeah.
I'm tickled.
speaking of Lord of the Rings, I mean, I don't want to assume, but did you get a chance to meet Ian Holm?
I did not meet Ian Holm, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And he was somebody I met a lot of the cast and crew, but I didn't meet him.
Yeah.
And
And obviously for folks right now, yeah, I mean, at the time of this recording, we did get the news that he passed away.
Yeah.
We got the news today. I'm not sure if he died yesterday or today, but yeah, we did get that news. But yeah, I was just curious if you had a chance to meet him.
No, I mean, I had a lot of fun with a lot of the cast, but not with him. And I know he never was in the best of health. He wasn't in bad health, I think, when we were doing those discs. I know when he was working on The Hobbit, I think they had to fly and shoot all of his sequences in London.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So yeah, obviously he was not doing too well, but yeah, definitely a loss that Hollywood's feeling today. And
Certainly.
Yeah. But he has such a great body of work. I mean, he's so good. Everything. I mean, I remember him, of course, from Alien, but everything from Chariots of Fire. I mean, he's done a million things, and it's what a life he led, and he left us with such a legacy of great work.
Absolutely. And those movies, the Lord of the Rings films and the books, have a special place in my heart. And actually, just last week, I got my wife to sit down and we watched all three movies, the extended editions of all three, which is a marathon. And it was amazing. It was it was just an experience watching all of them.
And they hold up so well too.
So good.
So good.
They're so good. And she texted me about Ian Holm and 88, and now she's a fan. She's like, too bad he didn't make it to his 111th birthday, and
I know.
It just felt like something there. I don't know. There's something about that story and that just captures you. And well, hopefully he's happy and wherever he is.
he's in the gray. He went to the Grey Havens.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
He went after Frodo.
How about that scene, huh? I'm sitting there, and I warned my wife about that scene. Days.
You just mentioned it. I just got chills.
I know. I said there's going to be a point in the movie, in the third movie, where I'm going to cry like a baby uncontrollably at some point, and she's like, "What? Something bad happened?" I'm like, "No, just wait." And it's
had she not seen the movies before?
She had seen Fellowship, I believe, in the theater, like when it first came out. Obviously, because it was in the theater, and I don't think she'd seen any of the others. So yeah, This was and I'm like, no, you're not watching the theatrical, you're watching the extended. So that was a 12.5-hour thing over a week and a half, and it was a hell of an experience, and I it feels like something I want to do every once a year or something.
Yeah. No, it was amazing to work on those films and to meet the people. I did a lot of interviews for those discs, and on Two Towers, I was there for months doing these. I mean, I interviewed the greenskeeper of Fangorn Forest, who literally it took for 3 hours, and the interviews were so long. When I interviewed Christopher Lee, who played Saruman, obviously, I was in England, and it was a 5-hour interview.
Oh my goodness.
Wow.
He must have been was he as intimidating as everyone was, or was he the nicest man in the world?
He was the nicest, most well-spoken man. And I've developed a sort of a technique to interview people, to interview celebrities, and for DVDs, because when you're interviewing people for DVDs and special features, Blu-rays, 4Ks, it's not like it's a press junket. Because what you're trying to do is a much more of a deep dive, and you really want to get a sense of someone's personality, and you're going to be there for a lot longer than 5 minutes or something. Right. And they're not promoting anything.
Right, you're for sound bites.
Yeah, we're looking for stories, and we're looking to find out who the best special features allow you to get a glimpse into who this person is as an individual. So my tactic, if you want to call it that, is I have to find something about the person that I'm going to interview that I love about them. Something that's very specific that for me, like the movie that we're talking about, I happen to love this movie a lot for various reasons, but I'd have to know something about that person. And there's so many things I could have said to Christopher Lee, but when I was going to interview him, the director Billy Wilder passed away, and he played Sherlock Holmes' brother Mycroft Holmes in The Private Life of Sherlock Holmes in Billy Wilder's last film.
Oh,
So when I went and sat down with him at the Dorchester Hotel in London to sit down, I said, Mr. Lee, I just want to start by saying I'm very sorry to hear that Billy Wilder passed away this week. Did you stay in touch? Were you guys did you guys talk? And in his voice, he was like, "Oh, I spoke to Billy every week, and I already miss him terribly."
oh.
And then he looked at me and he said, like something to the effect of, "I very much appreciate you asking me about that, young man," because he knew that I wasn't just being like, "Oh, tell me about Saruman." You know, he knew that it's my way of telling my interview subject that I've done research and that I'm not here to ask you stupid questions.
Right. Well, I'm
And
talking to you man to man, sort of a thing, right? Yeah.
and once you've done that, and even though it is a tactic, I have to be able, it has to mean something to me, or it won't, it won't play. And people have to know, like when I interviewed Gabriel Byrne for Usual Suspects, I'd never met him, and I was like this, I was like, dude, before we start, I got to just say, I mean, you played Uther Pendragon in Excalibur, and in the beginning of Excalibur, you rode the dragon's breath across to to the castle, and you slept with Igraine in a full suit of armor, played by John Borman's daughter, and I was very enthusiastic because I said this to him. He laughed. He's like, no one, in his Irish brogue, he's like, and no one remembers I was even in Excalibur. So,
yeah, that's when you were doing the usual suspects special features. Was that during the movie, or was that after?
No, it was after. It was in 2001 because
wow, okay, because
at
that
the
came out in
time,
95, I believe. Yeah.
And back then nobody was doing these things, but in the early 2000s, these special editions were all the rage,
Right.
and so people would come back, and that was, you had to wrangle everybody. And I have to say, excuse me, I have to say that, there's obviously, he's sort of had a huge fall from grace, but Kevin Spacey had he only agreed to be interviewed for the disc as long as all of the other suspects and Bryan Singer were interviewed.
Oh wow, that's good of him.
And I thought that was a pretty stand-up thing to do, because he wanted to make sure that all of his fellow actors were represented, and the director. That it wasn't, because he had just come off of a victory for American Beauty.
Oh yeah.
Second Academy Award. And people are complex, and all I can do is judge people by what I know of them personally. And I thought that was a really stand-up thing to do.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, obviously we hear, the things he's accused of is despicable. I mean, there's no denying that, but there's also no denying his talent and his, just what he's done for film and everything like that. It's just, you can't deny that. I mean,
no, people are complex animals, and I think people compartmentalize parts of their lives. I mean, a person's sexuality is different than a person's professional life.
Right.
And now we want to conflate everything, and it's people are complex. It's a different situation. But
100%.
But it was making DVD special features. I loved it because how else would I get on the sets of $200 million films and literally walk around with a camera all day, stick it in people's faces while they were working, and ask them whatever I wanted to know? And it was frustrating because I've produced films since then. I haven't been able to direct, but I feel like, and there's been a very few of us who were afforded these opportunities to be embedded with a crew, whether it's Narnia or Superman Returns or X-Men 2, where I was on the set with Superman and Narnia. We were there every single day. And to
No,
watch a film, I mean, it gives you an insight into how films are produced that you can't get anywhere else. And I feel like with the movie I'm working on now, well, that I finished, Tango Shalom, my experience now has brought me a knowledge that a lot of people in Hollywood just don't have.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been able to apply it across the board now in a number of different avenues and areas, which has been great. So doing the DVD thing was something people are like, well, why didn't you concentrate on your directing career? And I'm like, well, you know, they're paying me. I'm flying all over the world. I'm being put up places and I'm learning so much. And it's like, at the end of the day, you know, how many people get to be Steven Spielberg? Well, not many. But I'm having these incredible life affirming experiences working on multiple films. And while, yeah, I'm only a documentarian or whatever, but I've still had a great, great, great time.
Now, I mean, obviously, I want to get to the topic of the show, but I still have to ask what you know. You worked with Bryan Singer with Usual Suspects and Superman Returns. Is this an industry of it's all about who you know?
No. I think I have to tell you. I think Hollywood. There's different Hollywoods, and my primary experience of Hollywood has been on the production side, actually making things or being on set.
Okay.
And that culture is a very different culture than trying to get people to give you money. Or going to production companies and try and sell your projects or sell spec scripts or that. It's a whole, like, once you're in production, you've already got over that hurdle. And so the movie's already getting made. And that it's when you're in production, there's so much money at stake. Being in when you're making a film, it's the one time when you can actually give every second a dollar value. Because you're making a movie, you're shooting for 12 hours. You have a 12-hour day and you have to shoot so many pages a day. And because, you know, like, let's say your day, it's $100,000 a day. Well, if you back in the $100,000 to those 12 hours, you can break down, like, each second might cost, I don't know what the numbers are, but $10, $20. Like, think about that. If every second of your life was costing you $20, well, that's what it's like to be on a film set. So the people that work on film sets are incredibly good at their jobs. And it's not just enough to be incredibly good at your job. You also have to be political. You have to be social. You have to be personable. You have to be all of these things all at once, because you have to be well liked on a film set, because if you're not, you cause static. And so people want to work with people they like. And that means they have to know those people. So it is definitely true. If you know somebody, it's easier to get a job. But then again, you have to be really good at your job. There's really no mediocre people on a film set, which is actually very life affirming, to watch a bunch of people that are really good at their jobs. And a film set runs the gamut. You have the top 1%ers, the producers, then you have a lot of blue collar workers, you've got painters, and you've got grip and electric people. And I love being on a set, and it's this amalgamation of all different disciplines and people to work together. And the point is to make your day. Make sure that if you have 4.5 pages to shoot in a day and you're on 4 different sets, that you make your day. And watching everybody work is a beautiful thing. It's really amazing to see.
No, definitely.
So to answer your question, though, it's partly that. I mean, once
I didn't mean, you know, it's all about who you know, even if you're talentless or not. You know, obviously talent's involved, and, you know, likability's involved, but it also helps to, you know, have an in with someone.
No, it does. It does, because people want to work with. There's too much at stake, so they have to know who you are and they have to trust you.
Right.
And
Yeah.
it's not like, well, just I know someone's, I mean, yes, there are areas of the business where people get jobs because they know somebody,
Right.
but for production or editorial or post-production and all that, you really need to know what you're doing.
Right.
It helps if you know people, like raising money for projects. That always helps. I mean, it's always
Yeah.
nice to meet new people and all that, but ultimately I do think it's a job that if you want to become successful in the film business, you can go out and make a movie now. And
Right.
I think that the quickest way, if you want to get into a film career, go make a film.
Yeah.
Because if you make a festival darling, or you make a short that somebody likes, like I worked with my friend Lucas Kendall, we made a 15-minute short called Sky Fighter that came out last year. And we sold it to the Dust Network. It's a 15-minute short. They bought it for their YouTube channel.
Oh,
Yeah.
nice.
And I think that there's a lot of that going on now because there's so many talented people around the world.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think, now is an amazing time for filmmakers, but at the same time, it's obviously super competitive, and it's harder to get your name out there than maybe it was in the 70s or 60s, things like that. But
Yeah, there's so much stuff now.
Yeah.
There's so much content. I mean, it's
Yeah.
just insane. Look at what we're doing on YouTube or what you're
Right.
doing with podcasting. It's just it's insane.
Yeah, it's oversaturated.
Yeah.
But Dave loves my segues. I was gonna relate it to Ian Holm. You said about Ian Holm and him in Alien, which is a science fiction movie,
Oh
and
my
we're
God.
actually
Oh
talking
my
about a science fiction movie
Oh,
called
Christ.
Contact. Was that a
I
good
should have mentioned
segue?
Fifth Element, because
Yeah.
that was
Oh,
good.
yeah.
Fifth
That's.
Element,
Oh,
yeah.
yeah. That's right.
Uh,
Um,
Okay,
Go ahead.
Robin, quickly, what are your thoughts on? Do you like the Fifth Element or not?
I love the Fifth Element.
Okay.
I think it's to me it's like reading. It's the cinematic equivalent of a heavy metal comic story.
Okay.
And
Yes.
I
Yeah.
grew up reading heavy metal. It's very European and it's very French, and it's so funny because I'm always telling people that Americans have a hard time, I think, with other forms. There's no sense of whimsy. Like Godzilla movies or kaiju movies are whimsical to
Yeah.
buy into giant monsters. And I think the Fifth Element, the alien, the designs of the creatures and what goes on, there's a sense of whimsy to it. It's not so grounded in reality.
No.
And I think Americans have a hard time. Like when people watch, I saw Fifth Element, the Cinerama Dome in Hollywood, and I loved it. I was like, this is great. But a lot of people saw it and they're like, what the hell is this? What is this goofiness? I mean, they couldn't buy into the stylization of it.
Yeah.
They just didn't dig it. But I love the Fifth Element.
I liked it.
Were you
My-
one of the people, Dave, that said, "What the hell is this"?
I know where Rob's going, but Chris Tucker was a large pill to swallow.
Yeah, it was. It was. Are you green? No, it was Corbin Dallas. Look, he wanted Luc Besson wanted Prince to play that role.
Oh,
And I'm a
wow.
huge Prince fan, but I think that Ruby Rod in that movie is an alien. He's like, even though he's a human being, he is like,
Yeah.
it's just the problem is the many different tones of that film are jarring, I think, to American audiences because we're used to a specific thing when it comes to our science fiction. And look at the difference. Alien to me is a perfect film that has great verisimilitude, that you believe it utterly.
Yeah.
You buy into this blue collar truck driver crew on the Nostromo, and their experience and everything they do seems so real. And the Fifth Element is diametrically opposed to that. It's so different, and yet still it's this goofy, candy colored sci-fi pop Euro. I don't know what you call it, but it's certainly interesting. And it comes out of the European comic book tradition, and there's so much goofiness in it, but I love it all. I love that confection.
Maybe if you ever come on another episode, we'll discuss that one. All right. That's, because I'm on the more on the lines of you, Rob. I really enjoy that movie. I love it. I think it's great. So, but today, as you clicked on this episode, you were expecting Contact. But great conversation here so far with Robert Meyer Burnett, and I'm loving it. But I'm gonna love even more his take on the 1997 movie directed by Robert Zemeckis, Contact, starring Jodie Foster, Matthew McConaughey. Who else is in it, Dave?
James Woods, Angela Bassett,
there you go.
Jake Busey as a
Tom
religious
Skerritt.
zealot.
Yeah.
That is Jake Busey. That's
yeah.
Which I think is a weak point in the film. I'm just gonna say that off the top.
We'll save that, Dave.
Okay.
We'll save that. Now,
but the cast is crazy. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. Now we gave you a list of films.
John Hurt as S.R. Hadley.
Oh yes, definitely
in an unexpected role. It's like there's John Hurt.
Yeah.
Want to take a ride?
All right, let's just talk about that. I'm totally getting Blade Runner vibes from this scene when we first see him.
Yeah,
and Rob, we totally just as a free form talk about the movie. We don't go in chronological order.
Talk to the
end. What you think of, just whatever. It's just a conversation about the movie. But I felt Blade Runner vibes when we first meet John Hurt in the airplane, the private jet, whatever you want to call it.
His home that he lives on.
Yes, exactly. Did you guys feel that? I mean, is that Blade Runner? I mean, the guy.
It's funny because now that you mention it, he is the Eldon Terrell of the movie. The same way that Eldon Terrell is, and they even kind of look the same. They're kind of a craggy face, and the way they speak. The light that burns twice as bright burns half as long. And I think you're right about that. I mean, I love that character. I love the character that John Hurt plays in this movie, and the fact that he is this industrialist that's obviously suffering from terminal cancer, and he's to me he's the he's Elon Musk, but Elon Musk older, and I love that character. And I think it's interesting that now we live in a world almost 2.5 decades later where there is a guy like Elon Musk who's actually building rockets, changing our technology, landing booster rockets at sea. And I love that character. I mean, I think one of the great things about Contact is it's a serious movie, but it also has that kind of delicious, you're running afoul of politics in Washington. You've got the politics of finding grants, and it really has a lot going on in the movie. I mean, it starts out as a personal story about a woman who's sort of haunted by the death of her father, and how he put her on this path, and she lives this sort of solitary path, or lives a solitary life where she's on this path to find extraterrestrial life. She wants to hear ET phone home.
Right.
Yeah. And Jodie Foster, I think, is I like her in the role. And what's interesting is you've got Robert Zemeckis, of course, who directed Who Framed Roger Rabbit and Back to the Future and Used Cars. And this is a based on a book by Carl Sagan, the great Carl Sagan.
Right.
So, it really, what I love about this film is that it poses a very plausible first contact scenario.
Right.
In that we there's a signal, and we have been getting signals from space that we don't know what they are now. But at the time a signal comes from space, it starts out as a simple mathematical signal, and then these plans are downloaded, and the aliens assume, they're like, okay, we're broadcasting this not necessarily to Earth, but they're coming out from Vega, and whoever wants to listen to them or hear them, or if they can, if a race can hear them and decipher them and build this machine, then they can join the galactic community.
Yeah. And
I think that's I love the premise. I love that whole premise. And I love real space stuff. I mean, the Apollo program when I was a kid was a big deal. And I think that the whole premise of this film, I think it's a very elegant movie. It's both elegant and pulpy at the same time.
Right. It's got
And
like 90s cheese to it at points.
I find
yes,
it
You know,
charming. I mean, you
I
get
do
yes.
too. Yeah, I mean,
like you
it's
have the blind William Fichtner character. Like that's such a '90s move, but I kind of like it. You know, he's blind, but he can hear really well. You know,
uh,
it's just
I put
cool. I like
when
it.
I was watching it for the show, I put in my notes like, what was the plot device to have him blind? And then I sort of figured it out by the end that obviously he has
The heightened.
heightened senses. He's heightened hearing, and he can hear things that are going on at the end with Jodie Foster's character. So yeah, I mean that,
And
but
also the static. I mean,
yeah,
when he hears the
Yeah,
signal,
yeah,
he
you can hear.
understands that there's
Yeah.
multiple, there's harmonics in these signals that that are not readily apparent.
right, and that's just such an interesting character for that actor, because you don't see him
No.
in something like that. Usually he's a villain. It seems like comes to mind is Dark Knight for some reason.
Or Heat,
Yeah,
he
Heath, yeah,
steals, he rips off money,
right,
and yeah,
yeah,
he's great.
yeah,
Well,
yeah, yeah.
I
Go ahead.
like going back to the William Hurt character and then Jodie Foster. It's sort of what's great about this movie, and I guess I didn't read the novel, but maybe what Sagan was maybe going is trying to square this circle, right, between science and some sort of a destiny, some sort of a meaning. They keep talking about this in the movie. And this movie does kind of show you a path, right? We don't have to be, it's not like science versus faith necessarily, in conflict altogether. And we're kind of left with, well, we don't know, but we're still trying to figure things out. And,
Hmm.
the more we learn, the closer we're going to get to a reality. And even the movie itself, but even by the end, even though it doesn't quite give you all the answers, I still found them satisfying, because it was like I got up to another like rung on the ladder. We're still climbing. We're moving forward. So I appreciated that about this film. And yeah, Jodie Foster, she's great. She's I like the establishing her as a kid for kind of her purpose, and then kind of it does feel like she was kind of chosen, right? Wouldn't you guys agree with that?
Yeah.
Like between with her getting that alien extraterrestrial signal, and then of course the Hurt character, the Elon Musk character, he sort of chose her too, right? He kind of found her, and
Yeah, following her career,
Yeah.
like when she goes and what I really like about this movie, it's a number of different movies in one. So you've got, it starts out, you meet Jodie Foster, and then it cuts to her working at the in Puerto Rico at the giant the Arecibo radio telescope there, and where she meets Matthew McConaughey, and they kind of have this relationship, and you think, ooh, is this going to be another McConaissance rom-com thing? And and Palmer Yost or Jost Palmer, he's a man of the cloth,
yeah,
but he's a hipster man of the cloth, and he can still sleep with a hot
of
young woman he
course,
meets.
yeah.
I didn't want to stay celibate,
Yeah,
I didn't want to wear cloth.
but they have this relationship, and then it goes to the extension. They go to the VLA, the Very Large Array, where she's working for SETI, and you meet these other cast of characters, and which is great. They've got this great kind of this hippie scientist enclave that's so that's fun.
Yeah.
And then when they get the signal, and it's really well done, like when they get that signal, and she ties in all of the different radio telescopes and moves them in to get the signal, and then they check with other places in the world. I mean, it's really great. And this movie was post X-Files, so the X-Files had already been on, and they dealt with those things, and so it was kind of in the zeitgeist when it came out. But then and then suddenly the military swoops in, and it becomes the conspiracy thriller. Like the government, they're all pissed at Jodie Foster for telling people about this, and what does it mean? And then suddenly it's like, will the right-wing politicians, exemplified by James Woods, quash this incredible information? And he's like, what if they're going to invade us? And of course, then you have Angela Bassett. She's the smart black woman that's like the voice of reason. She's the Democratic,
Right.
well, she's the Michelle Obama. My husband could be president. You don't know. I mean, he's not, because Clinton's president. But so you have the political, the red and blue in those two characters.
Well,
which
how
is
good
great.
are both of those actors in that going back and forth? Aren't they so nice?
They're so, and first of all, I truth be told, I have a huge crush on Angela Bassett, and I fell in love with her in Catherine Bigelow's 1995 movie Strange Days,
Okay.
which is a great science fiction film, where she plays Lenny Nero, the character Lenny Nero, played by Ray Fiennes, she plays his bodyguard, and she's like a total badass. And people were saying, if they ever make an X-Men movie, she should play Storm. And
good call.
Back then, she should have. I mean, she's
way
a little
better.
older.
Yeah, but still.
She's badass. I love Angela Bassett. I think she's beautiful and sexy.
She's amazing in this. And by the way, where the hell has James Woods been? Sorry, I just.
Yeah, well, he's
perfect role for him, being a right wing, conservative guy.
But what's cool about this is there's the duality of you've got Jodie Foster and you've got Matthew McConaughey, and the idea of faith versus science.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the
then you've got the Democratic and the Republican points of view in the government and who's going to do what. And we have these incredible debates. And then there's this idea, you've got the science element. You've got the John Hurt character, the S.R. Haddon character, who's like, I am at the forefront of all technological advancement. I'm actually above, both literally and figuratively. I'm above the world. I'm above all these people, and I can call the shots.
Yeah.
Right.
And there's the great, they're doing all this scientific explanation. And one of my favorite scenes in the movie is where Jodie Foster gets summoned to go see S.R. Haddon and get on his plane, lands at this lonely airfield. And then they have this great conversation about how I've been watching your career and you've come to me for grants and, you're one of my biggest investments and apparently it's paid off.
Well,
even though you didn't know that.
It's almost like that's a juxtaposition with her meeting him and then her meeting the alien, which turns out to be a vision of her father. They downloaded information of her that aliens did, and then S.R.
Haddon.
S.R. Haddon. He totally has information on her. So there's like a comparison there. It's they got this human figure who knows everything about you and everything like that, but then you go to this
it's
alien
like kicked
world.
up a level, basically.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is that these different characters, they reaffirm that Jodie Foster's character is pure of heart.
Right.
Like her and even at the same time she gets, I love when he says to her that she's discovered the signal, but then everybody wants to take credit for it. Tom Skerritt.
Oh, he's stepping all over her.
He's stepping all over her. He's so Tom Skerritt, again, from Alien and Top Gun. He wants to take, he's like the head of sciences for the government or something, and he's going to take credit.
Who gets chosen first, right?
He gets chosen first. Yeah. And it's so great that all these people, how suddenly it shows how politicking works and all that, and then the idea that this is the biggest event in human history and what all that means. What I love about this movie is it's just so much fun to watch because it's so interesting as it moves along.
Yeah.
And it deals with so many, it's like watching 10 movies at once.
It really is. Yeah. It's, quite honestly, I've last time I saw this was probably late 90s.
Right.
It's, I forgot how actually philosophical it was. I didn't realize how deep it was, and this it hit in all the right points for me.
Well, even when they're trying to decide who's going to be that one person who's going to go into this thing that they've created, which, by the way, all of that was really cool. Figuring out what the signal was and how they
it's so compelling.
Yeah, we get this. They sent back. Well, they got the transmission from Hitler from the Berlin Games in '36, which apparently was like the strongest signal Earth had ever sent.
Well, that was the first signal. That was the very first brought. Yeah. And even then, you know what I love about that? I love that scene. It's such a great scene. There's this great cut to James Wood. He's like, when you see that it's the Nazis, he turns and kind of goes, okay, and that's the moment when they're like, James Woods is like, okay, now the military's coming in, we're locking this all down.
Exactly.
And it's funny because then cooler heads prevail and they're able to say, no, this was the first broadcast that goes into space. Right. It's just because it was the Nazis, for as horrible and evil as they were, they were. And so I think it, even especially today when we're talking a lot about where is America and what is our past? We're pulling down statues of people that existed 250 years ago, and we're judging them on our time today.
Mhm.
There was a reality to life 200 years ago that is not the same as today.
Right.
And to pillory our historical figures for transgressions that we have now come to understand a quarter of a millennia later were bad. We're this knee-jerk reactionary stuff that we do now is counterproductive.
Right.
Now, if there was nobody around in this movie that understood, that said, no, wait a minute, these aliens are not fans of Hitler or National Socialism or the Nazi Party. This just happened to be the first broadcast that was ever
It's the first one they could have
broadcast from Earth.
received. Yeah.
It's the first one they could have received. Now, if there was somebody like nowadays on Twitter, somebody would be like, "Oh my God, these aliens! I mean, they're promoting right-wing Nazis." I mean, it would have been so ridiculous because
Right.
this knee-jerk, let's burn it all down. No, let's stop. Let's think.
Yeah.
And I love that this movie is all about that. It's all about
Right.
offering different points of view, and people have to stop and consider. And on one hand, you would think that it's going to be pro-science and anti-faith. Like that's the obvious thing, but it really isn't. And with Matthew McConaughey, and there's that great sequence where when Jodie Foster's being questioned, will she be the one to represent Earth, to go on this machine to do whatever was going to happen? And they ask her, that Matthew McConaughey asks a question about God. Do you believe in God? And if you're a representative of the human race, which is whether you believe in God or not, you can't deny that the human race has been shaped by our belief in a deity. We have the Bible, the Quran, the Bhagavad Gita.
The year it's 2020. That's 2020 years since Jesus.
Right. And I mean, it's like, in a way, if you don't have necessarily, and this always struck me because I'm a man of science, and I'm not a man of faith, really, even though I was raised in the Jewish faith, and I did go to Sunday school a lot, and I did learn Hebrew, and I was bar mitzvah and all that. I'm not a believer, and yet when I watch this movie, even I have to recognize that to be a representative of the human race, you have to have an understanding of faith, and how faith and religion has been such a large part of our world growing up. I mean, even before the Judeo-Christian tradition, you had the gods of Olympus. Before that, you had the Greek, the Egyptian gods, and Set, and whatever, the gods of sun, and if you didn't have a real understanding of that's where we're coming from, you might not be the best representative to go. And I thought for sure that, of course you're on Jodie Foster's side, but when that question gets asked of her, and you realize therein is the end of her chances of being picked to go on this mission, that it's a great moment, and it makes you think. You go, wow, but Matthew McConaughey's he asked a good question. He asked a question that was valid, and I think that was
real quick. I mean, he asked a question that was valid. Do you believe in God? But why do you think he asked that in that moment? Like, why was it so important to him? I know he says later that I just didn't want you to go because I didn't want to lose you. But why do you think it was that important to him for him to ask her that in that moment?
I think because she might be going to meet God. I think that if there is,
that's a good,
the idea of, we don't know, but this is the modern equivalent of a burning bush, this message.
right.
It's prophetic. It's a machine. It's talking to us in the language of science, when before, if God really sent Moses down, or with the Ten Commandments or whatever, mankind was never in a position. We didn't have science yet, or certainly in a primitive situation. So if there is a God, and God spoke to us before in a certain way, now he's speaking to us in the language of science, which would have to be, I mean, he created it, right? He, she, it, whatever. God who created the universe, mathematics and science is what he used. The governing laws of the universe are that. And if she is adverse. Like, what if she was actually going to meet God, and this being was, or it, or whatever, this, who knows, but
Yeah.
this cosmic entity out there, if she didn't believe, she might have rejected that person or that entity or that thing.
Yeah.
And maybe it's a person who has faith that would be more apt to be open to whatever it was that was out in the great beyond, that is waiting on the end of the phone.
Go ahead, Dave.
Oh, sorry. No, I that's great conversation. But yes, I think she had to learn that lesson, which is you have to learn some humility to
Yes.
to get into this project. You can't just be super smart science lady who knows everything, and you're going to walk in and just own the bar or whatever.
Right.
There's something far bigger than you, and you got to kind of keep that in mind. And I think, to your point, Rob, and this is sort of how I feel, which is, I don't know what I believe in God. I don't know what that means, to be
Right.
honest. I don't know if it's written in the holy books, or people talk about like a simulation, and I'm sure you've heard that. Well, somebody built the simulation, right? Do I call that God?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, and I think again, use the word humility. Like, there is something greater than me. I don't know what it is, but at least if I can touch it, then I have to I have to have kind of an open mind about what it is I'm going
Yes.
to experience.
Open mind is key there, Dave.
Right.
I think that's definitely a theme of this movie. Obviously, the existence of God, the existence of life out there. I believe there is a God. But I think this movie, touches on that, obviously, that subject, but what uh, what is God, obviously, and everything like that. But
It's
I
just
think
like
it's
sort of a
summed up.
train that we're all kind of together, and we're all trying to figure it out. I mean, when she meets her dad, here we are to the end of the movie, he doesn't really know either, but he's a
Right.
little bit
Right.
farther along than you are, and now
That's
you're like
what
catching up.
I'm
I
saying
love
is,
that.
yeah, definitely. And what I'm saying is, we can't judge people on what they believe, because I mean, as Matthew McConaughey said to her, he asked her something about God, and then he said, or she said, like, prove it, and he said, well,
Yes.
did you love your
Conversation.
did you love your dad?
Yeah, how do you prove
And
it?
he said, prove it. And it's like, how do you prove something like that? So I mean, it's such a powerful statement on that this subject. Like, it's again so philosophical that it's almost hard for me to comprehend. Just a high school graduate here. I'm not
But that's why I think this movie is so worthwhile to watch. And
Right.
I find myself coming back to this movie over and over and over, because those questions, one of the things that I think is unfortunate about where we are, especially in America now, is that we've become so tribal, and we're all split down the middle. You either believe this or you don't believe that. I'm on this side or that side.
Right.
In actuality, like, one of the great things about what I've discovered in my old age, one of the great things about Americans is that Americans always see the possibilities in something. And let's say, you live in a small town, and you might have 20 different people that have 20 different viewpoints, personal viewpoints. But if there's something that needs to get done, like somebody's house needs to be fixed, all 20 people will show up. You'll all roll out to help your fellow neighbor.
Right.
And despite your differences or your beliefs, you understand that your neighbor's house needs to be fixed. And we're not going to get into an argument about what our belief systems are. We're just going to fix the problem.
Right.
And that's what I think is really interesting about this particular film, is that everybody think they're villains, but they're even James Woods at the end of the movie, even after all the movie's gone down, there's that great exchange. It's one of my favorite exchanges in a movie. It's just such a little thing, but when Angela Bassett is talking to James Woods, and no one has believed that Ellie Ellie Arroway actually had this experience, because the indicators, it just looks like this machine that she was in,
Yeah.
the capsule
like
just fell through
from 50 different cameras or whatever it was.
and then they're having the conversation, and Angela Bassett's like, what I am interested in is her camera and the 18 hours of static that it recorded. And then James Woods says, yes, that is interesting, isn't it? and it leaves you with hope in that, okay, that these characters, that the Democrats and the Republicans they now have a piece of irrefutable evidence that they both have to acknowledge that there's something here. And if this movie kept going, or they made a sequel, you'd probably see James Woods and Angela Bassett working together, moving forward together, because they've both listened to the evidence. They're smart people, and despite their ideological divide, they now can work together for the greater good. And I love that the movie ends with that kind of note.
Because I think this movie is ripe for a sequel. I'll say real quickly. I think. Well, yeah, I was thinking this one. I'm like, wow, why didn't they come back to this? This is so set up for one.
Well, and also the one mistake that I think this movie makes, it kills me every time, is why don't they just send somebody else through the machine? I mean, they never say it can only be used once. Right. Just turn the fucking thing on again and go through.
They only say it's only you only have one. There's only room for one person, but
send someone every 20 minutes.
I mean, it's always, because at the end, like, she goes through and nobody believes her, and they don't do a good job. They never tell you in the movie that the machine can only be used once and it's burned out, or the bearings burned out. We can't fix it.
Point.
They never say that, and it's always bothered me. I'm like, send somebody else through, and see what happens. Because
and another thing that's bothered me is the 90s CGI, it didn't age well. It did not age well at all.
No, there's a lot of and at the time there was a lot of really impressive effects.
Right.
But now, the movement of ships, like the plane that takes her behind you and it takes you over to the Hokkaido Island. It's
that first explosion is really bad. When the horrible Gary Busey, or I'm not Gary Busey, with Jake Busey,
the other Busey,
the bomber. I didn't like that whole scene. I didn't like the subsequent explosion, how it looked. I had a real problem with that whole subplot. But
no, and he's so that Jake Busey. Look, I understand a religious zealot protecting his beliefs and all that, but it's really cliche. And the fact that he's wearing this like long wig, and he like come on, nobody noticed how they let him in there. How do you get past security? I mean, that's a little goofy.
So over the top, but again, I think it does send a message of, how can science and, religion coexist? Because again, I believe in science, I believe in all that, but I also believe that there is a higher power.
I don't think there's a way to really. Oh, sorry.
I think this movie teaches that, not teaches, but kind of conveys that you can believe in God and you shouldn't be judged for that or looked at as small for that. And you can also believe in science and shouldn't be, belittled and think you're small for that. Like, it's
no, and I think you're absolutely right. I think that's the great strength of this movie, is that it does not pillory. It does not come out and destroy the religion. Another, like the Rob Lowe character. Yeah. Rob Lowe is in this movie. He's playing another sort of a red state Republican zealot. He's. I mean, and let's face it, Bill Clinton's in this movie playing himself.
I know. Yeah. I wanted to mention this. The way the two technical highlights for me. One is just sound. The sound overall in this film is amazing.
It's amazing.
Yeah, and number two, the way they handled Bill Clinton in this film, it is so cool.
Yeah,
especially that press conference where the camera kind of just goes to the monitor.
Yeah,
and then whenever anybody, it feels so. Talk about verisimilitude, Rob.
Yeah,
you're in just this thing where you don't have to see the real guy talking about the aliens, because the way they're setting it all up, it just works perfectly.
Yeah,
I mean, these are actual clips of Bill Clinton, right?
Yeah, talking about God knows what, right?
Right, yeah. It just that I loved how they like incorporated it into the movie to make sense and everything. That was very well done.
Fantastic.
I'm actually surprised even after watching this again. I was basically watching it with fresh eyes. This is basically the first time I've seen it. I would say just because it's been so long since I've watched it. But yeah,
And you're older. You know, you're
right,
smarter.
yeah, exactly.
Not
And
smart.
well, I don't know about smarter, but but yeah, I mean, it's just I lost my thought, but you know,
Can I say a negative?
yes, please.
David Morse as the dad, it doesn't work for me. I want it to work, and maybe it's just me. Maybe it's because I see him more as like a bad guy in a lot of other films or something.
Right.
There's something about him, it just doesn't quite work for me. He's too stiff or something. Not loving enough to her for her to hold on to. I don't know. I could be wrong there. Well, right or wrong, but maybe disagree or not.
I like him in the beginning of the movie because she's a little girl and they have this relationship. But what I really think that the one thing that I like when I watch this movie, and I watch it a lot, I always turn it. I always skip through when she travels to Vega. I always skip that whole part. I don't like when she goes through the machine. I don't like when she goes and when she talks to David Morse. I don't like that. I like when she comes back because I'll tell you why.
Okay.
Because nothing happens in that scene.
That's what I was frustrated with, and that's what I kind of wanted to talk to you guys about. Is just
She kept repeating. I don't know what the line was. Like, I'm getting a lot of vibration, or some. She kept saying the same thing over and over again.
Like, I'm I forgot what she said, but yeah,
and the headset became very distracting.
Good to go, or whatever.
Yeah, good to go. When she actually got on the planet, I mean, I was wondering what your guys' thoughts were on that. You know, when I was watching it.
Well,
what's happening there? I mean, is it just him? Is the bottom line that hey, humans have a long way to go? We're eventually going to get there. We're eventually going to get to other life. Like what? Go
ahead, Rob.
Yeah. Well, I feel it's a huge letdown, to be honest, because here she goes through this conduit system, and it's cool seeing the other galaxies and the way she travels, and there's truly a sense of wonder there, the beauty of the universe, the infinitude of creation. And what's really interesting is this talk of science and faith. Regardless, the universe, the infinitude of the universe is staggering in its beauty and its conception. And the idea, like, what I was missing from this film is we're never going to know where the universe came from. We're just not going to know. But the idea of God itself is contained in the heavens. You cannot, if you start studying just how big the universe actually is,
right,
it is so astonishingly, incomprehensibly huge that it is divine in its conception.
It's beyond human comprehension.
Yeah, it truly is beyond human comprehension. And the movie makes you feel a little bit of that. But then when you get to the end and you're on this beach, this tropical beach, and the water's lapping up, and it just seems like it reduces, it's leading up. Now, I'm not saying it has to be this ambiguous 2001 ending, but it needed to, what I wanted from the film is I wanted some kind of epic, philosophical, and visual feast.
Yeah.
That all of the traditional narrative structures that we've gone through, the government conspiracy, the I lost my father, falling in love with a guy, and science versus faith, and all of that. I wanted something at the end of the film that made me gave me a sense of wonder, awe, and wonder.
Was this a technical problem, Rob? In 97?
No, I think it's a conception in that all you end up having is that she just has a conversation with her father, and that conversation is not very profound. There's no profundity in it. So you're sitting there and you're waiting for some kind of a revelation in this movie, something that leaves you with, I don't know, the ultimate questions to ponder. And he's like, well, we don't even know who built the conduit system that got you here.
True,
it's already here. And this is how it's done, small moves or whatever. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, okay, well, what do we send somebody else through? Like, and then at the end of the movie, when you see Ellie teaching again, she's teaching these kids. I'm like, wait a minute. If she's gone through this thing and she's had this experience, she's going to wind up back where she started from at the very large array teaching kids. Well, it'd be a big waste of space. She knows that there's alien civilizations. She should be at the forefront. Like, if I'd made this film, the end of this movie would be her with like at the end of Close Encounters or something, with a team of people. They've built a bigger machine and they're going to send a new group of people through. And you realize these are the first pilgrims, like they're not coming back or something. I mean, maybe that's just me. It just seems like we get to the film and it's unsatisfying.
I 100% agree. I mean, I do think that we were expecting a bigger payoff, but when you look at the actual message of the film, I think it's about her learning that things aren't always about science. Things
You're not going to get the answer.
Right.
You're not going to just solve the equation and then figure it all out, kind of a thing.
No, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. I completely agree.
Things can be taken on faith. They can be, we're supposed to believe that on faith, even as she says at the end with, when she's going through the Congress hearing and everything like that. So, no, I mean, I totally agree. Yeah, I would love to have a better answer from the alien who was her father. I would absolutely love that.
Yeah, she's looking like Roy Snyder on 2010. She's in the same set, I think, that same satellite array.
And real quick, I don't know how you feel about 2001. We here at Blockbuster Mentality actually absolutely love 2001.
We've called it we consider it the greatest film ever made. So.
Yeah, 2001. But you said the wormhole didn't work for you. But how do you feel about 2001 and the not wormhole, but that last scene before he gets to the
Stanley Kubrick is my favorite director of all time.
Oh, okay, nice.
And I think 2001 is the greatest science fiction film of all time. Nice. And I think the end of the movie, when Dave Bowman shows up in the hotel room, for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
I mean, I like that because the idea of the aliens have or this presence, this entity, these entities have provided a surroundings that he can comprehend in a completely incomprehensible situation.
Right.
And then he reaches that next stage of evolution he goes through his life and then evolves into the Star Child at the end. I think that, that's incredibly profound, and you can use it as a metaphor for anything, enlightenment or learning or the next stage of our evolution. I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But this film has not been ambiguous. I mean, this film is scenes, and when you get, I felt like the end of the movie, the scene
but this one comes out and says, "We thought you were doing this to make you feel more comfortable," which is clearly what you can deduce by watching 2001. David Moore's character just comes out and says it.
Right. No, absolutely right. We're making, but the thing is, she's this scientist that's figured all this stuff out, and I felt like the movie at the end, it didn't do something that was creative enough or compelling enough for the rest of the movie. And it's the only, I love everything else about this movie until you get to the end, and it's like, okay, but you're not, what are you saying? Like, and I understand, like, the idea of faith and science, but we see her go to Vega. We see her have this conversation with her father. So she knows what's up. But everyone else, like Palmer Joss at the end, Matthew McConaughey's like, well, I believe her. Well, of course you believe her. So do we, because we watched it happen. So this idea about science and faith, what would have been more interesting to me is like the David Morris as the alien goes, well, these conduits were already here. So those conduits could have been divine. All of this, all of the infinitude of creation could very well be divine. And the idea that when science finally reaches the mountain that religion's been talking about, the religious philosopher and the scientist will be standing on the top of the mountain meeting God at the same time. because they've been coming at this thing from two different
Right.
different points of view.
Just
And
give me
I
some
wanted,
fake mythology. Give me like 3 or 4 lines of these people did something and they did that thing and we're figuring out that, and then just name them and call them something, and then wow, okay, so
Well,
here's a whole new that's world building, right? Instead, he's
no,
like, well, I don't fucking know.
no, Dave.
Yeah.
Yeah, humans aren't ready yet. Well, it's little steps, little clicks, or whatever he says.
but
Yeah,
then,
come on,
but
Dave.
again, they've built the machine, and I keep asking, okay, little steps. They built this giant machine that still exists, so are they going to just start sending people through? Like, how do we
Right. Yeah.
join? Like, when you say little steps, I was waiting for what is the next step? Like,
Yeah.
what, wouldn't Ellie Arroway be at the forefront of, she's already gone to the new world. She's been our one ambassador. She knows it exists. So we should leave her, rather than talking about, well, it's a big waste of space if there's no one else up there. It's like, she already knows there's no one else up there. So why are you leaving her in a position where she's teaching children about, like, answering, like, she's gone back to, like, we're welcome. Here's the elementary school class from whatever school, and let me talk to you kids about, like, here's a woman that's like, she would have been at the forefront.
Yeah.
And I just think that the message, my biggest criticism of the movie is that the message gets muddled at the end.
Yeah.
I like to, I'm not disagreeing with you at all. I just like to play devil's advocate a
Of
little bit.
course.
You said, we saw her go through that and everything. You look at Clockwork Orange. I mean, he's having sex with the girl at the end. Is that really happening? Is that really what's going on there? And I'm sure that's the first movie that came to my mind. But there's other movies that
Well, I have an answer. I mean,
we see things on screen, but they might not actually happen. I personally, I believe it did happen. I'm just playing devil's advocate here.
well, I think that's Clockwork Orange is a really interesting. Clockwork Orange is one of my favorite films of all time.
Yeah.
And for me, the really difficult thing about that movie, the great philosophical question that it asks, is, for human beings, is it better to have free will and you have the ability to choose to do evil?
Right.
Or is it better that you have your free will taken away from you if you only are forced to do good?
Right.
And at the end of Clockwork Orange, remember, whenever he's fantasizing or dreaming, he can't even think about violence or sex or whatever.
Right.
So at the end of the movie, that image of him, I was cured, all right, and he's frolicking with that girl, that's in his mind. His mind has been, that's the image, I think.
So you think within the film it's clear that that's just a vision.
That's his vision, because he's gonna go do that, but he's been,
makes sense.
he's been, that's the way I always read it.
Celebrated for his, like,
that makes sense.
He's like pure again. He's gonna have beautiful, pure sex in front of a
or
group of people.
start another gang, which is,
Right.
and
We'll
I think
get there.
that's the really difficult. I used to show, when I was a kid, and I was the first kid that had a VCR, videotape deck and I would show people that movie.
Can you explain VCR to our audience? No.
Well, yeah. And what was funny was, there was a time when they didn't have them, and we were one of the first people to have one. And I worked at a video store. There weren't any of those either. When I was 13 years old, I shouldn't have been working there, but I was, because I would just show up there and hang out, and they couldn't get rid of me.
Might as well pay him.
When Clockwork Orange came out, I had seen, in the wake of Star Wars, I'll tell you a story. There was a book. I think it was a British book. It was called Sci-Fi Now, by a guy named Alan Frank. And it was a pictorial history of science fiction films up through Star Wars and Close Encounters. But because Close Encounters and Star Wars, which came out within 6 months of each other, created this huge sci-fi boom that we're still in the middle of 43 years later.
I love Close Encounters.
Yeah, there was a lot of stuff that came out. So this book came out, and my quest in life was to see every movie that was in this book. And Clockwork Orange was a movie I'd heard about, but I'm 13 and you couldn't rent movies, and nobody would tell me, like, when I'd ask people, I probably didn't ask people because I was reading it in books. So when it finally came out on video, the day it came out, I took it home. And I was 13 when I watched Clockwork Orange. So I'm like, and it was the first, I didn't know what I was expecting, but it was the most mind-blowing thing I ever saw. And it was the first movie in my life I watched. And as soon as it was over, I rewound it and watched it again, hoping my mom or dad would not come downstairs and see what I was watching. Cause I clearly at 13 should not have been watching this movie. But what I was so fascinated by was, even then I didn't quite get it all, certainly the language, but I got kind of what they were saying, and it made me ponder the question. And I would watch the movie, then I started reading about it, then I got the book, and the book is really hard to read because of the language. It comes with a glossary and you have to go back and forth, and I ended up liking the film, and I showed it to a lot of
after lunch.
yeah. And I would show it to my friends, and I would get mad because they would get bored after the first half an hour, after all the villainy that went on. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. Now this is when the movie gets really interesting. Now is when it starts to ask the questions that it asks. Right. And I think with Contact, my problem with Contact is that it doesn't. When you've actually watched what happens in the movie, and you've seen Ellie Arroway go through this thing and meet these aliens, and then they pull back and they bring you back to the same question of faith versus science, but they haven't given us the faith side of it. They've shown us what science has brought you. They've shown you going through these conduits and meeting the aliens, but on the other hand, they haven't given you the same. They've done such a good job of dealing with both sides of the argument that I feel that faith gets short shrift in the movie, if that makes any sense.
It makes a lot of sense. And what the David Morse character says is the answer to emptiness or nihilism, which is the thing that gnaws in the brain of all of us, in our souls, which is, this is all for just shit. What is the point of all of this? And his answer is that we find comfort in one another. And that's kind of okay, but I would have wanted more. We find comfort in something else. We found this thing. Tell me what it is. Show me the thing. Or don't even show me. Just tell me about it and say, you're not, that's a better way of saying you're not ready yet. Just tell me about a thing that you're going to learn about later. So that way I can be like, yes, I've seen it, and now I have faith that I'm going to learn about this. Because clearly the movie, it doesn't really dance around it. There's clearly some other intelligence going on. And whoever the David Morse alien is, I mean, they discovered these, the transportation things. There's clearly someone else that built these things. They found them, and they're there. But just tell me that it's going to be okay in some form of the film. That's what I want. That's what we all want.
I appreciated that scene. I appreciated that, they said, I figured it'd be more comfortable for you to see me rather than,
I want to know there's a purpose. Just that's what we're asking for. That's why we're watching the movie.
Also, you guys called us. You vaguely sent us your blueprints.
Just tell us, answer questions for me.
And I would have said, even they say, here's the point, when I would have liked to have heard David Morse also muse or wax rhapsodic and say, look, even though we're much more advanced than you are, and we're part of a galactic community that you are going to be a part of, we have questions of existence that we don't know either. And even though we're so advanced and we're part of this galactic community that you'll be a part of, we still don't know the great answers of existence. Is there a God? Is there, we ask ourselves that. And as far as we know, the universe, the wonder of the cosmos was here way before we were, and we don't know where it came from. Right. And we are still asking ourselves, why are we here? What's going on? And that's why we're able to communicate with species such as yourselves, because we're asking ourselves the same questions, even though we're millions of years more advanced than you. And I think that would have been interesting to show that we can have a first contact with an alien species, but even that alien species is still grappling with their own religion and their own relationship with God.
Yeah.
And then you realize that what Palmer Joss was saying at the very beginning, that the reason, or asking Ellie, do you believe in God? Isn't it interesting that you meet these same advanced aliens that are technologically millions of years ahead of us, and they too are asking the same questions that we are?
Fantastic point.
Yeah.
Absolutely great. Yeah, that might have that would have been, yes. So we need to just rework that ending.
Well, it's funny because I think we live in a world now where we always judge movies based on what we wish they could be. I certainly feel that way about Rise of Skywalker.
Right.
But this movie, I try and judge movies for what they are.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I do feel it is a shortcoming of this film, as much as I do love it, and I do love this movie. But it's not perfect because there is that shortcoming at the end. You can't send us to an alien. You can't prove Ellie Arroway's point that science is real. There are aliens. We built this machine, but then give the question of faith short shrift. And I don't think that's fair. I think it's playing, because then it pulls back, and then you have this hearing and everything, and they make the question. They make the question sort of sophomoric in that, well, I believe her. Like,
Right.
well, motherfucker, you should believe her because she went through the thing. Like we watched it happen. So you can't. The question of faith in science becomes moot because science, it worked. We saw it work.
The proof is in the static of the 18 hours of static.
Yeah, you're not left with a whole lot there, right? Because what is the science? The only evidence of the science is the static of 18 hours. Well, that's not all that satisfying either.
No.
So you're not.
But again, I mean, I think that's why we love movies, because the ambiguity. I'm gonna edit this out because I can't pronounce ambiguity.
I do have. Well, I want to jump in and say something that Rob said.
I'm talking.
Maybe this was 2 hours. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Something Rob said. I don't know how long this conversation is, but something about the vastness of the universe. It is worth mentioning how great the opening of this film is. With the music and just going out and out and out. I wish I seen this film in the movie theater, because it was maybe the most calming experience I've ever had watching a film. I was just there, pleasantly relaxed for like 3 minutes watching this.
It's an amazing shot. It's one of the greatest opening shots of any movie.
That's the we always talk about this on the show. I feel like I always bring it up, and you'll appreciate this. Rob, is Kubrick, I feel like, always does this, is the tone setting at the beginning of a movie.
Yeah.
You know, just a large sound and strange image. He did it with Clockwork Orange. He did it with 2001. He did it with many others.
Yeah.
You know, there's that tone setting you set for the movie to get you in the mood for the movie, to get your mindset off of everyday activities.
Everything, yeah, it was clear.
You know, and just, okay, I'm in this movie now. Like, what's going on? And yeah, I love that. I love that touch that, you know, filmmakers do.
Yeah, no, I agree. And you know, it's interesting because Zemeckis is very much a populist filmmaker.
Yes.
You know, you look at like Back to the Future, I think is one of the more perfect movies ever made, from the a script to story standpoint. It's so enjoyable.
Yep.
You know, and he's done some really amazing things with visual effects and all that. But sometimes from a story perspective, he tends, sometimes style is over substance. And I find this, and but by the way, you know, this movie it skews pretty close to the book, so it is coming from Carl Sagan. I mean, the great Carl Sagan, who one of my favorite books I ever read was a book he wrote called The Demon Haunted World, and it's all about science and our relationship to it and all of that. And I just feel that this film, it does fall a little bit short with how it does end, and I really would have liked to continue. It's funny for me to say this, but I think Faith deserved a little bit more.
Yeah.
In the end.
It was a bit mocked with they're talking about like the Rob Lowe character, and of course the bad guy with the Jake Busey character. But it's sort of, it's the movie's almost this is of the 90s, but maybe it's almost a little too political in a sense, and it kind of maybe for the time for 1997 to make a point about the religious right maybe versus being a timeless film about something that's good for all of humanity that could like as I'm watching this I'm like I don't care about this Rob Lowe character, like I don't care about his concerns at all, you know, as I'm watching this now. Maybe at the
Well,
time
he is, like you said, he's very cliche.
yeah.
Right.
And I feel like it's funny for me to argue this point. I don't like it when I think one of the problems that we have in this country is we want to vilify, everybody wants to vilify the other side.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of religious inquiry is very interesting, and it's very valid, and it's very worthwhile. Even if, like, when I was a little kid, my best friend was Catholic, and I used to go to church with him a lot. And it was very different than my experience as a Jew, but I loved going to church. I loved the pageantry of it. I loved the there was something about it that was very comforting to me. I mean, I'm talking about like when I went to his first communion. And there was a time also when I was working at Warner Brothers when I was in my early 20s, when I would go to this evangelical, well, it was a charismatic church here in Van Nuys with a producer friend of mine. She walked with the Lord, a believer. And I would go to that church, and I really liked the pastor's name was Jack Hayford. And I used to go, it's called the Church on the Way. And I used to like to go, like she'd go take me to church. And sometimes I'd call her up and go, are you going to this church? Because I just like to listen to his sermons.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, I'm like, you know, what he's saying, whether you believe that Jesus Christ is your Lord and Savior or not, there is value to being here.
Right.
You know, there is value to being in this church
Yes.
and meeting the people that are there and hearing Jack Hayford's sermons.
Yes.
And I always thought that, why is it that we are, like on my show, I always say every person you meet has a story to tell. You have yet to hear. All you have to do is listen. I just don't understand why there's so much hatred or tribalism between these kinds of points of view, because I've always found reading examinations of religion or science or philosophy worthwhile. And if you close your mind off to these things, and it's like you can't, there's no value here unless you absolutely believe it. And I'm like, that isn't true.
No.
You know, there's value in all of these experiences and all of human thought and endeavor, and there's something worthwhile in it. And I think that at the end of the movie, you know, it would have been more interesting if the aliens said, she could have even asked, you know, is there a God? Is there a deity? And David Morris would say, we don't know either.
Yeah.
All we know is this: the universe is an amazing, wondrous place. There's so much of it, even we don't understand. We're just now beginning to figure it out. But, you know, if he had said something about faith, I mean, the whole thing about small moves and all this is the way it's been done since, like, the way what has been done. What is the next move? What are we supposed to do after the movie's over?
Doing what? Yeah, and your point, Rob, I think what you're saying is that just as Jodie Foster is doing her science to find the answer, so were you going to that church to find, you know, a similar answer. You know, we're all trying to, I think at the end of the movie, she says we're all trying to find truth, right?
Right.
And truth can come in many different forms.
Right.
It could be through, I don't know, getting these signals from outer space, or it could be from, you know, a deity in the sky. And I think there, I have to believe, and this movie is trying to make that point that there is some convergence of the two. It doesn't do it in the best way, and maybe it's a little bit too of its own time or something like that. But this idea that you know, between faith and science, it is a strong point that it is, you know, it's not an easy one to square. Even us trying to talk through it is difficult. And here we are criticizing a movie that's trying to do the same thing. Right. But, you know, I think this is kind of what the show is all about. which is these kinds of ideas. When we get them, I don't even think we really even talk through the plot all that much. We're just talking about the ideas of the film, and it's the stuff that gets kind of gets your brain churning.
Well, I mean, if nothing else, isn't it interesting that a 1997 adaptation of a Carl Sagan book can generate this kind of discussion between the three of us
Absolutely.
so
Yeah.
many years later?
Yeah, exactly. Some technical aspects before we wrap up. Well, first of all, I think Matthew McConaughey.
Wrap up, aren't we just getting started?
Oh yeah, we're just getting started here. Matthew McConaughey in this movie I thought was great. In '97, obviously became the rom-com guy. Soon after this, in the early 2000s and everything like that. But I think he did a phenomenal job in this movie as the religious philosopher.
He's a great actor. I don't even know why he ever even got hate, even for his rom-coms. The guy's a
Well,
great
even in this
actor.
movie, people said he was miscast.
Really?
If you read there's people that say he was miscast, and I'm like, I've met guys like him, religious leaders or people that are going around the world that are they're not just I thought he was very credible as a
Me too.
modern young evangelical or somebody it's always bothered me. Like, we live in this world now, even America, you've got religion is being pitted against science, or liberalism is being pitted against conservatism. And I'm like, why aren't we all talking?
Right. It's sort of like one side is stupid and the other side is smart, and that's the end of the conversation.
I hate that. I hate it so much.
Yes, I know exactly what you're talking about.
And I think that we should all, I mean, anybody that's trying to make sense of life, the experience of existence, like, why are we here?
Right.
Those questions. I love Star Trek, obviously. Star Trek, the motion picture, when Spock takes Kirk's hand and tries to explain what V'ger, this incredible intelligence, is asking. And V'ger's asking, is this all I am? Is there nothing more? That even V'ger, the ultimate logic in the universe, this gigantic machine thing, is asking the same questions that we are. And I think that everyone who exists, any creature, I can only imagine any being, any sentient being across the universe, asks themselves, what is it I'm supposed to be doing? Like, I can't just live and grow old and die. There must be some reason why I'm here.
Yes.
If I am the thermodynamic miracle that Dr. Manhattan talks about in Watchmen, if I am that miracle, there must be a reason why there's only one of me in the entire infinitude of the universe.
Right.
These are great questions to ponder. And
absolutely, that's what we're doing here. Yes, I mean,
on a blockbuster movie podcast. Come on, we're doing great.
Come on. One other technical aspect I wanted to mention was about the mirror shot when she runs up to try to get her dad's medicine. She's running up the stairs. It's one shot, and then we see it's a reflection in the mirror. Like, this technical achievement, for lack of a better term, is amazing. I mean, it's
really cool. I don't know how to pull it off, to be honest.
It's Rob as a
how'd they do it, Rob?
How'd they do it?
Well, look, Robert Zemeckis, like James Cameron, was pushing the limits of what technology was capable of doing. And if you watch shots like that, or there's shots in his movie What Lies Beneath, his thriller, where they do some incredible camera pyrotechnics. I mean, all the way back to Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and then when he was making Polar Express. And
Zemeckis did What Lies Beneath?
Yeah.
Wow.
Underrated movie.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, and there's a lot of crazy camera moves in that too. And I think Zemeckis really liked playing with the technology, and he was pushing it. I mean, obviously, Contact has a lot of dated effects in it, but it was those sleight of hand tricks, like where's the camera when you can see a reflection in the mirror? And he really was pioneering techniques that were new and unusual. And again, it's it's a combination of CG and practical work and green screen work, but he did a lot of that.
So what does that take? Does that take a director to be like, okay, I want to do this thing, I have this idea in my mind?
Yes.
Or yeah.
Yes. So a director, how it would go is like a director would have an idea for a shot, and then he would talk to either his DP, who would probably talk to his effects supervisor, his VFX supervisor, and they would figure out a way to do it. And they would have various effects elements, and they'd have to shoot live action plates to know that they're going to finish them off later in post to create those kinds of things. I mean, now it's a lot easier to do, but back then, 23 years ago, it was a lot harder. So to come up with these techniques, I mean, he was the guy that was working with photorealistic, I mean, creating entire, like the Polar Express is that CG, creating CG people and all of that. He was at the cutting edge of, I mean, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, when he was using 3D animation to bring animated characters that looked 3D into the real world.
Right.
And he really was an effects pioneer. And it's kind of sad, like he hasn't done much lately. And his last movie, like the movie he did with Brad Pitt, and he did a World War II film, and I forget what it's called, Allied. I think it's called Allied.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And I was really disappointed in it. And you want to hear a funny story?
Yes.
More than anything.
So I was in New Mexico. I'm going to tell the story anyway. So I was in New Mexico with this girl I was dating, and we were there. We were making a documentary, and we were in New Mexico, and we went to a spa in the mountains above Santa Fe. And this spa was like, it was a beautiful spa where they had all kinds of different mineral baths.
Yeah,
had
sounds great.
It was fantastic. So I was bringing my towels with me and to turn them in. And I walk up to the counter, and standing right next to me is Robert Zemeckis.
Oh, wow.
Ooh.
In a spa in New Mexico, Now, I don't know who he was there with. I will say that he was there. He was there, not to tell tales out of school, but I didn't see. But there was one person that he might have been there with.
Clearly, his wife.
Sure, maybe. And it was very funny because I had just watched 1941, Spielberg's 1941, that he was one of the writers on.
Right.
And it was so funny because here he is. Nobody knows who he is. Nobody at the spa would know who he is.
Right.
And I turned and I look. I mean, I'm literally standing 3 feet away from him. We're on the corner of this counter. I'm one place and he's next to me. Like I could reach out and pat him on the shoulder. And I just look up, and it was so funny because it was almost like a reflex for me. I'm like, "Hey, you're Robert Zemeckis," and I could see that he's like, "God damn it." He did not want to be recognized, and I wasn't even thinking. It was one of those things, like you look up and you're like, it's Robert Zemeckis. Like, how can I not say?
Breaking story here on Blockbuster Mentality.
Yeah, and it was so funny, and I said to him, and he's like looking around, like, yeah, so I am. I go, hey man, I gotta tell you, I just listened to just watched 1941. It just came out on Blu-ray, and it was, I think I listened to audio commentary and all this. I'm like going on, and it was funny because I figured that was the first thing that popped into my mind was 1940. Of all the things I could have talked to him about, I should have been like Contact, right. But I didn't. And he could not get away from me fast enough. Let me just tell you.
Well, I've got a great story that pairs with that, which is along the same lines. I had the same, you're talking kindred spirit here. At my work office, this was a couple of years ago, in my work building, I get into an elevator, and who walks in is Derek Jeter. And what did I say? Hey, you're Derek Jeter. It was just me and him in the elevator. And he goes, yep. And I go, that was the end of the conversation. It was the worst. It was the absolute worst.
Well, I mean, for me, I think about I told you my technique to talk to people from DVDs and stuff, but it's so weird because when first of all, Robert Zemeckis, he's if you know what he looks like, he's a very distinct looking person, but in
Sure.
a spawns in Santa Fe, New Mexico.
Why would you be
Like,
imagining you'd be seeing him, right?
yeah, it was such, for me, it was such a
You guys doing
shocking.
were you
it was-
doing a schwitz?
Well, yeah, I mean, it was all different. Yeah, that's why I could have said that to him. I didn't. I should have. That would have been funny. But it was such a weird. It was so incongruous to my experience. Like, I'm like, what? I want to be like, what the fuck are you doing here? Like, and he would have said, I'm here, like, enjoying the spa,
Yeah.
like everybody else,
living
like
my life. Yeah.
But it's just because, like, how many people would even care or know? Like,
Right,
it was just one of those moments where, and even I lost my. It wasn't that I wasn't cool. It was one of those things when you literally look up, and you're like, oh my God, you're Robert Zemeckis. You know, it just occurred to me,
Yeah.
like, it was so uncool.
Yeah.
Like, normally I would have been, I would have been, excuse me.
Yeah.
And under my breath, aren't you Robert Zemeckis? You know, and instead it was more like, oh my God. And it was just a funny, and this was not that long ago. This was like 5 years ago.
Wow.
Well,
So
these are the stories we tell ourselves that we're smoother than we think. And
Variety is going to be reporting this soon. So.
I know. He'll cancel me in Hollywood. That Burnett kid, never gonna. I'm not a kid, but that guy's never gonna work again.
What are you gonna do? You still have beer, you know. You got wine, you know.
Yeah.
What are you gonna do?
He's staying on YouTube for the rest of his life. That's all he's gonna do.
It's not a bad place.
Is there anything else you wanted to say about Contact, Rob?
Well, you know, it is a movie that there are movies that I watch for comfort food. You know, I go back to, and just whenever I put them on, sometimes for no reason. If it's one of those movies where I can't decide what to watch,
Yeah,
I'll just throw it on.
It's your tater tot.
And yeah, and it's yeah.
Did you say tater tot?
Tater tot, yeah.
And it's like that. That's funny. I love that. It's my tater tots movie. You know, there's some frozen tater tots in the freezer. I'm not going to make something good. There they are. Let's go make them.
We know what Dave's comfort food is now.
Yeah, I mean, but I like Contact because, first of all, it's the ultimate wish fulfillment movie.
Right.
I want to be Ellie Arroway. I want to be Jodie Foster in that movie. I want that to happen to me.
Yeah.
Well, we kind of talked about your belief in God a little, but what do you believe that there is life out there?
Oh, yeah. I mean, 100%. And
this movie kind of convinces you of that, like her talking about, you know, a million, you know, if you take 1 out of 1,000,000 of this galaxy and then 1 out of 1,000,000 of this, you know, and it's, you know, the chances are so high that there's intelligent life out there.
Yeah. And also, I mean, I'm always fascinated by religion in science fiction stories. There's a book I have up there called The Book of Strange New Things by Michael Faber, who also wrote Under the Skin, that Scarlett Johansson starred in a movie called based on that book, and she plays an alien.
Right.
But I just think that like, let's roll down and let's just say God exists. The God of the Old Testament who created the heavens and earth exists. Why would he just put creatures on one planet in the entire infinitude of creation? Like,
Right.
why would he just do one? Like, it makes no sense to me. Like, you wouldn't. Why then would you create the entirety of the heavens? That is, I mean, I have to say, when I was making my film Free Enterprise, the deep field photograph from the Hubble telescope was published, and it was in a fold-out National Geographic, and it was a picture the Hubble telescope took of not stars but galaxies. And each galaxy, and I was working on the Star Trek experience, cutting stuff for the Star Trek experience in Vegas, and I literally, for like a week, I had an existential crisis where I was looking at this picture every day that I put up, and it was really the infinitude of the universe. In the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, they called it the total perspective vortex, where you see yourself in relation and you realize how insignificant you are. And I really had a problem. I'm like, if the universe is so vast, nothing we do, like one day a solar flare can come in, like at the end of the movie Knowing that Alex Proyas directed, a
I
solar
actually
flare
really
could,
like that movie.
I do too. I love that movie.
I know.
And what if that happens and then all of human history, all of our folly, everybody who lived, everybody who died will
Yeah.
just be burned away in an instant and nobody will care.
Yep.
Right.
And I had that thing happen, and it was for like a week. I had a hard time. I couldn't sleep. I was anxious all the time, and I'm like, what does my life mean? You know, and maybe if I had a priest or a pastor or somebody I could have gone to talk to, I could have been like, listen, man, I saw this picture of what God created, and would you
He's
please
gonna give you the
explain to
David
me?
Morse answer, which I don't fucking know.
Yeah, I know. That would have been good.
I don't know. Oh man, but yeah, I mean that's context for you folks. Now Rob, we do a rating system here at Blockbuster Mentality.
Of course.
We got to do that. We rate it on stars and buckets of popcorn. So stars is the actual quality of the film. So maybe your Godfathers, your
Cinematic quality. Yeah.
right, cinematic quality. Dave always is upset at how much I explain this, over-explain
Because
it.
it's the worst explanation ever, every single time.
Yeah, well, it is what it is. And then buckets of popcorn is the entertainment quality.
Right.
That's your Avengers Endgame. That's your Alien. Well, nah, Alien. I don't know, Dave. Anyways, you know what I'm saying, right?
Again.
So it's basically cinematic quality versus entertainment quality.
Yes.
Dave,
And we go on a scale of 1 to 5. So, a scale of 1 to 5 stars in terms of quality, 1 to 5 buckets of popcorn in terms of your entertainment value. You want me to start? Give my rating first?
Go for it.
Okay. So I'm going to give this thing 4 stars despite its problems because it generates these kinds of conversations that we've had. And I think our show, if anything, it's about ideas, it's about themes, it's about things that make us really want to, the things that just kind of churn in our head, that gnaw at our brain, that we can't help but think about and talk about. And that's kind of why we do a show. And I think this movie, so good for Rob to suggest doing this one, because I haven't seen this one in so long, but it was great. It was a great ride despite its flaws. So I'm going to give this thing 4 buckets of popcorn. I'm sorry, 4 stars rather, and 3 buckets of popcorn. It's not the most entertaining film in the world, but it's still it is still a good ride. I think this one would have been great in a movie theater. So I'm going.
Oh, it was
4 stars and 3 buckets. And by the way, we did the Master last episode, and I only gave it 3 stars. So I'm saying Contact is a better movie than the Master.
Wow.
Son of a bitch.
Because we were watching it, I'm like, what the hell is even going on here? Anyway, so that's a whole other thing.
Yeah, that's a whole nother story. So yeah, I'll give this. I love the philosophical themes in this movie. I love it. Just totally enthralls me. Totally grabs me in. I'll give this thing.
Oh yes, it's tough, but well chosen.
I'll give it 4 stars.
This is copying.
Yeah, no, well, yeah. 2 buckets of popcorn. It's not, I could see, the average movie watcher just not being entertained by this. It's not, your Jurassic Parks, your Die Hards, everything like that. So 4 stars, 2 buckets of popcorn is my rating.
No half there, huh? Normally you're trying to.
I didn't do halves. So yeah, Rob, we can do halves.
You can do thirds if you want, or sixteenths,
or whatever you want.
Well, I have to say that when it comes to rating movies, I sort of have a philosophy that I never pit one movie against another.
Yeah.
I have to rate the movie in terms of what do I feel the intent was behind the film itself, and did the filmmakers succeed in doing what they set out to do. And the idea is like comparing and contrasting. Like Lawrence of Arabia to me would be a 5 bucket of popcorn and 5-star film.
Mhm.
However, if you were going to compare that to say Die Hard, I think for Die Hard is also a 5-star and a 5 bucket of popcorn movie. But if you tried to compare and contrast the two and go, well, so are you saying that Lawrence of Arabia and Die Hard are equal? I would be like, well, no, they're not. They shouldn't be compared in terms of a scale, because they both succeeded admirably at what they set out to do. But
Yes.
Die
Right.
Hard wasn't trying to outdo Lawrence of Arabia. They're very different films.
And that's I think
That's
what
exactly
we
right. I'm
the
still
puzzle
feeling
feeling
self-conscious over our guest from the master, and he really liked the movie, and I struggled with it. But go ahead.
no, but that's the thing. I mean, that's that's why we came up with this rating system.
We're
Is
still trying to work
because
out the kinks now. I don't know if Rob just destroyed
stars.
it or not.
No. So what I would say to this is going to seem strange, but I would give this movie, and I love this movie, 3.5 stars.
Okay.
But I would give it 4 buckets of popcorn.
Okay. Yeah.
I would give it because there's a lot of it. I mean, I love watching it. I find this movie wildly entertaining for me personally, but as a movie, I got to give it 3.5 stars because there's too many things in it. As much as I love it, and as much as I find it incredibly rewatchable, there's things in it that I think fall short.
Yeah. Definitely makes sense.
But I still love the movie.
Yeah, I mean,
No,
3.5 stars
yes.
isn't a bad score. I mean, that's a decent score for a movie. I would, if I made a movie and you gave it 3.5 stars, I'd be like, wow, Robert Meyer Burnett gave me 3.5 stars on my movie, 4 buckets of popcorn. It's
That's well done.
Yeah.
And I say 4 bucks of popcorn because of how many times I've rewatched this movie.
Right. Yeah, and that's what we mean by that rating. So yeah, I mean, if that's something you want to constantly go back to, then yeah.
I mean, there are movies that I'm surprised how many times I've rewatched them. This is one of those movies.
Yeah.
Another one of those movies is David Fincher's The Social Network.
Really?
I think The Social Network is one of the most I love that movie. I could watch it over. I mean, yes, I'll watch Godfather. I saw Empire Strikes Back in the theater 26 times. I mean, that's a different. But there are movies that come along that I'm surprised, the combination of the characters, the actors, the direction, the writing, all of that, I'm surprised at movies that I particularly love that on the surface I shouldn't love them as much as I do. But The Social Network is, I don't know why. I watch that movie all the time, and I love it so much. And there's not a lot happens really.
It's all subjective, my man. It's all subjective, It's I love the movie too. It's the score is just amazing. Jesse Eisenberg, I'm actually, I'm not a huge fan of, but in Social
in that movie,
he's great.
There's a very obnoxious quality. In this film, I think the stars for me comes from, again, the ideas, the themes. I mean, this is the circle I'm trying to square in my own life, and I would assume most thinking people are, and we didn't quite get there, but it showed me some kind of a path forward possibly, and the fact that, again, we're thinking of this stuff, it's in my mind. How do we solve this problem? Is it intractable? I don't know. Maybe the dad said, that all sucks. I'm fake, and you just go back to the earth. It doesn't matter. I don't know. I don't believe that. I think there is an answer, and I want to keep striving for that answer.
Yeah,
I agree. I mean, because the funny thing about it is, like, we're here. Like, do we have to know why we're here? We're here. So why not? Like, I think life is pretty great. I think it's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
So
I like being alive.
I really like being alive. What Kubrick? What did I think Private Joker said in Full Metal Jacket? The dead only know one thing: it's better to be alive.
Exactly.
Yep.
And I agree with that. Life is pretty great, and it'll end soon enough. So I'm in no hurry to get to that end.
Right.
I'm not. I
Even if
can't
it is
wait.
the Grey Havens, and the Grey Havens sound amazing, but I'm not quite sure that they exist.
Yeah, or if they do, I don't want to spend the rest of my days there.
And life is all I've ever known. So it's just I really enjoy it.
Oh, it's so
I do
terrifying.
too, and I hope I can see Tenet in an IMAX theater next month.
Oh yes, please, 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 please. All right, folks. Well, that is Contact. That is 1997's Contact. Robert Zemeckis, Jodie Foster, Matthew McConaughey. Real quick, want to say Matthew McConaughey did amazing in this film. I think he
Why?
should.
Why are you bringing this up again?
David, I mentioned it before the show.
We really want to make sure we emphasize the
I think.
McConaughey.
Well, because I mentioned it before the show, before Rob was on. Thank you very much. I thought McConaughey was great, and this was
He's really handsome.
his romantic comedy movies that he did. Anyway, shut up. I'm done. All right, folks. Well, that is it for us. Rob, it's been a pleasure having you.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been an honor to be here.
Yes, and you're welcome back anytime. We love. This has been a very fun discussion. Where can people find you? What projects are you working on? What are your last words?
Well, people can find me on Twitter at Burnett RM. Find me on Instagram at Robert Meyer Burnett, or find me on my YouTube channel, The Burnett Work, and my show Robservations, the show about something, which I do pretty much every day. I'm also on the John Campea show a lot, usually Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday. And there's a film that I produced called Tango Shalom. And I like to tell people it's an indie Jewish spiritual quest family dance comedy fable, because the world needs more of those.
Yeah, for sure.
Look for that somewhere. And then, of course, a very lurid and bloody horror film I produced, The Hills Run Red, came out on Blu-ray from Scream Factory this week. And for those of you who are like, what, it came out on a disc, how 20th century? But if you still collect physical media, as I do, there's a lot of great special features on it. The movie's 81 minutes, but there's 6.5 hours of new special features and 2 more hours. So there's a total of 8.5 hours of special features on a movie that's only 81 minutes. So there you go. So look for that. It's out. It came out this week.
There you go, folks. We will be looking for that. All right. Well, you can follow us on iTunes, Spotify, review us, rate us, everything. Anywhere you can find podcasts. You can find our Twitter at BlockbusterCast. I am at BCCore. Dave, where can they find you?
You can find me at Dave_Quist. And please check out Robservations every day on YouTube. Great stuff. I've been following it pretty much every day for the last 6 or 7 months, and Rob is amazing, as you can tell by listening to this episode.
Oh, you're too kind.
Rob, it's been a pleasure. And all right, folks, well, that is it for us. For Rob and Dave, I am Ben, and as always, grab some popcorn, grab some snacks. We'll catch you guys
At the movies.